In this video I'm going to show two methods to reinforce fiberglass ribs. Reasons to do this would be that the ribs in the hull are too thin. If they're too thin, then they can be broken by BB damage. For this demonstration I'm going to use the recent Indianapolis hull I made. This was the first hull I've made in a few years, so I forgot quite how much fiberglass to use, which resulted in the hull being thinner than desired. So what's too thin? In general, I'd say the rib should be, like at least 1/8 of an inch thick or so, where then these are closer to a 1/16. With larger ships with side mounts, which are going to take a lot more damage, certainly I'd say like an 1/8 inch at a minimum, but then maybe closer to 3/16 is desired. For example, here's the Sodak. And the Sodak, the ribs are a good deal thicker. They're about 3/16. I know those will hold up to BB damage just fine. And then this is a relatively large cruiser, so I'm not too worried about the weight to be added. Alright, two methods I'm going to show are reinforcing the hull before you cut the windows, and then reinforcing after the windows are cut. I'm doing it this way to just show both. If I wasn't making a video, I would reinforce the ribs before cutting the hull, because when you reinforce after, you'll have to do a good amount of cleanup on the ribs to cut them back to size. Alright, the first half I'm going to do will be reinforcing existing ribs. So this is on a bare hull, so it'll be pretty easy. I've also done this in the past on fully assembled ships when I've just seen that the ribs are too thin. It's easier on an empty hull because there's no deck obstruction to worry about. So what I've done so far is I roughed up the surface of where I'll be fiberglassing. You can see some sanding marks. I also used a Dremel to make sure the backs are smooth, because that'll allow the fiberglass to go and have no air gaps. And then I've removed the dust and wiped it down with acetone. So now what I'll do is I will tape the outside of the hull with painter's tape, and then that will help catch epoxy, because we do expect some epoxy to go off the sides either way. And then by taping it, it'll mean your outside surface is still clean and you don't end up with extra lumps. So I'll do that, and then I'll cut strips of fiberglass mat. Okay, I'm ready to start the first side. So I've taped the entire hull, which will catch epoxy if it drips off. I've also cut up little strips, so I have strips for the deck rim and then also for the ribs of various lengths. In terms of epoxy, I'm going to use US Composites. I'll also use some milled fibers on some of the areas, just as extra to sort of help fill in any gaps. So the process is pretty simple. I'll mix up the epoxy. I'll first apply it to the ribs, then I'll put down the mat, then I'll make sure that's soaked through, and then I'll do 2 layers. So this is 1.5 ounce mat, so adding 2 layers of this will make the ribs plenty strong. My main focus is really on the ribs where above the waterline, because below the waterline BBs would be sort of blocked by water, and with something like a cruiser you don't expect to get many shots below the waterline. Another thing I'll consider is I'll probably do one piece that goes from the rib like all the way up, sort of like that. Then I don't want to do too many because then it'll make the deck rim here lumpy, as when I go to cut the deck piece, because then it'll sort of be inconsistent. So I'll probably do like one piece overlap, but the second piece I'll put like lower, so it's only on the rib area, just to sort of avoid the lump factor there. Finished laying down the fiberglass on the first side. Keys here are to make sure the mat is wetted all the way through. Also want to make sure anytime there's a curve that it's sort of hugging the curve. And I had some extra, so I put a little more on the rim. And then other notes, I typically cut the strips to be about a 1/2 inch wide because they'll sort of move around a little bit even though the ribs are a 1/4 inch wide. So now I'll let this dry. Once it's dry, remove the tape, and then I'll use the existing ribs. They'll very clearly show where the excess needs to be cut, and then we'd go about cutting that. The first half of the boat has its ribs reinforced, and I remove the tape. So you can see by using the tape you end up with a nice smooth surface. The ribs are much stronger. And then the existing cuts make it clear in terms of where it needs to be trimmed. And then to show the other method, I've just laid up the ribs on the inside. From here, you don't have such a clear view of exactly where the ribs are, so I marked them beforehand. And then once it dries, I'll cut out both sides and compare the results. The epoxy dried on the second side, so you can see how the ribs line up there. And then for this one, I'll just be doing a single cut when I cut it out. Whereas on the starboard side here, I'll be pretty much trimming using the existing ribs as the line. In this case, because the first hull had gel coat, it's very clear to see where the ribs go. So I'll cut out both sides and then show the end results. Here's the end result after cutting out the side which hadn't been cut out before, and then trimming the side where the existing ribs were reinforced. I'll just quickly pan over. For my opinion, the end result is really the same. I don't think there's a difference in quality from one method to the other. If the ribs here are different thickness, it's just based off the thickness of the hull and how much reinforcement was applied. So I guess one advantage of cutting the boat out before you reinforce is it lets you know with a bit more confidence how thick the existing fiberglass is. But in terms of like layer adhesion, both methods have the same approach of roughing up the existing surface and then fully wetting the fiberglass mat, so adhesion should be the same. I mean, I think you can see on some of these where the line is between existing fiberglass and new, but really not much difference in the end result. This will wrap up this video. So we showed the two methods of reinforcing fiberglass ribs. Both work depending on the situation, and even though maybe in some cases a more dreaded exercise, it really doesn't take too long, just a couple days, considering the drying time for the fiberglass. If I had a choice, I would put the reinforcement on before cutting out the hull. It is a bit faster because you're only making the cuts once, even though the individual cuts will take a bit longer because you'll be cutting through thicker fiberglass, but overall it is will take less total time to do. Hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching.